Today we'd like to welcome Robert Shiller, co-author of Fishing for Fools. His new book about Wall Street that the income generation will find particularly interesting. Professor Shiller, you don't really know about this, but I actually have a bone to pick with Yale. They were the only school I applied to when I was going to get my undergraduate degree who wouldn't give me a single penny of financial aid, and as a result, I couldn't go there. Now, I know you're not from that department, but if in later life, if I decided I wanted to go back to Yale for a graduate degree, do you think maybe you could pull some strings with the financial aid department for me?
Well, you know, I don't know when you applied, but the Yale portfolio, managed by David Swenson, has grown from less than $1 billion to in the mid-20 billions. That makes it easier for Yale to give financial aid. So I'll bet if you were young today and did it again, you'd get it. Yeah. Now,
I'm just going to pretend for a minute that I didn't hear you call me not young, and we'll get on with the show. But today's show, of course, is about inflation, and I want to talk about your book just a little bit later. But today there's lots of rumblings about deflation versus inflation. Even on December 16th, Janet Yellen mentioned that although she raised rates by a quarter point, the reality was that she mentioned she's struggling to get inflation up to where she'd like it to be. Tell us about your thoughts looking forward.
Well, Janet Yellen has been influential in the idea that the ideal inflation rate is not 0, but it's something like 2%. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason is that history shows that periods of deflation are economically weak. So let's stay a comfortable 2 percentage points away from deflation. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. She's trying. I don't think it's perfectly possible to control these things.
No, it isn't, but that's something I've wrestled with myself. I understand the theory behind 2% being a good inflation rate for a healthy economy, but I also know that for a good part of the history of our country, there was no inflation. But you believe, for the most part, that 2% is probably a pretty healthy number?
Well, I think this is really the influence of historical economics, behavioral economics. Yeah, I mean, it's better to have a little cushion. Maybe it's a kind of fish. Maybe it's kind of just, people get confused by 2% inflation and they maybe make mistakes. But on balance, it's a good thing. And we have to try to get there. I think Janet Yellen is right.
So tell us in your own words, why, our income generation viewers, of course, are always hearing from me in terms of my thoughts, but tell us in your own words why you believe she's had such a difficult time creating any inflation at all.
You know, to me, it mirrors exactly the reverse of the problem that Arthur Burns had as Fed chairman decades ago, that inflation just kept creeping up and he just didn't seem to have any ability to stop it. Mm-hmm. And he didn't understand, I think he admitted he didn't understand why that was happening. So, you know, the price dynamics is a complicated field. The low inflation now has something to do with our weak outlook and our sense of reduced optimism, things like that. And the Fed chairman can't control those accurately.
Yeah, and frankly, the raising of short-term interest rates, if anything, is not going to help create inflation because, in essence, we're just beginning to just a small extent to tighten while the rest of the world is easing. So what do you think has to be done to try to create that 2% inflation rate?
Well, I think that rates are still low. That's the important thing. The economy, you know, the unemployment rate is down to 4.9%. And historically, you know, central banks would raise rates quite a bit in that situation. The small amount that they were raised is still leaving them low, and it should still work.
Now, Professor Shiller, your new book talks about the intentional and unintentional reasons behind the manipulations of Wall Street. And in that, you and I actually have a lot in common about our concerns. Talk to us from your standpoint about that.
Well, our book is not just about Wall Street. This is my book with George Akerlof. We think that there's a need to emphasize integrity in business, and that we need business organizations that uphold integrity, and we need government regulation. Akerlof and I love free markets, but we know that they can go awry, and I guess that's obvious, but it's not obvious in its entirety. So the financial crisis that we saw that really started in 2008, I don't think it was the result of mostly evil doers that doing crimes that could put people in jail. It was more people selling things a little bit too, not being completely forthcoming, maybe in the fine print forthcoming, but that's all. So we saw, mortgage securities oversold. People were oversold on the advantages of buying a home at the time. Mm-hmm. These are problems that catapulted us into a huge crisis. Not criminal problems generally, but problems that do challenge our integrity. And the next step has to be more and better integrity in business.
And of course, you can't legislate integrity. It seems like whenever you change the rules and the laws, then somebody finds a way around those rules and laws. So it has to come from a different source. And it seems like greed is a big part of it. Is there anything else beside corporate greed, would you say, that causes this phenomenon?
Well, I'm a scholar of behavioral economics. Right now, we talk about more than just greed. There's a whole array of psychological principles. But yeah, I mean, selfishness is part of the story. And I think that, if you go back to the 19th century, remember Horatio Alger? Mm-hmm. He wrote all these popular books for boys about success in business. But I went back and read one of them just out of interest. It was not just about if you try hard, you can be a success. It was about integrity. And it was about business people who hold back and do the right thing are much more likely in the long run to prevail.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. I very, very much appreciate it, as do all of our viewers. And I'm looking forward to getting that new financial aid package in the mail as soon as I get back up north. So with that in mind, stay with us. We have a commercial break, and we'll be right back.